Remove him from the premises. The order snapped across the salt-heavy air like a line pulled too tight, sharp enough to make a few nearby sailors glance over their shoulders. Lieutenant Aaron Pike didn't raise his voice, but he didn't need to. Authority sat clean on his uniform, pressed edges, polished shoes planted firm on the concrete of Pier 7, a place where only active personnel and cleared command were supposed to stand. In front of him, just beyond the painted yellow boundary line, stood an old man who didn't belong, at least, not by any visible measure. Walter Quinn looked like he had walked out of another decade entirely, wearing a faded field jacket that had lost its color to years of sun and wind, denim worn thin at the knees, boots that had seen more miles than most vehicles parked on base. He didn't argue. He didn't even seem surprised. The wind coming off the water tugged lightly at his jacket, carrying the distant hum of engines and the low mechanical rhythm of ships idling in the harbor. Pike took a step closer, impatience tightening his jaw. "Sir, this is a restricted naval facility. You need to leave. Now." Two security personnel moved in from either side, their movements professional but cautious, hands hovering just short of contact. Something about the man's stillness made them hesitate, even if they couldn't explain why. Walter's eyes, pale and steady, didn't meet Pike's right away. Instead, he seemed to be looking past him, beyond the pier, toward the gray silhouettes of destroyers lined up against the horizon, as if he were listening to something no one else could hear. Pike followed his gaze for half a second, then shook it off, irritation creeping in. "Did you hear me?" he pressed, louder now, aware that a small crowd had begun to form, junior sailors, a couple of deck officers, all pretending not to watch. "This isn't a museum for retirees." A few quiet chuckles rippled through the group, thin and uncertain. Walter finally shifted, slow and deliberate, his gaze settling on Pike with a calm that felt out of place in a moment built for conflict. There was no defiance in it, no challenge, just a kind of quiet weight that didn't match the rest of him. "I heard you," he said, voice low, rough like gravel under a tire, but steady. That was all. No explanation. No defense. Pike exhaled through his nose, already done with the conversation. He gave a short nod to the security team. "Escort him out." One of the guards reached for Walter's arm, fingers brushing the fabric of the old jacket. The contact was light, almost hesitant. Walter didn't pull away. He simply let his hand rest near his chest, thumb grazing the edge of a small, unmarked metal tag hanging from a worn cord beneath the jacket, something easy to miss, something that looked like nothing at all. The harbor wind picked up, rattling a loose halyard somewhere above, the sound sharp against the quiet tension settling over the pier. And for just a moment, so brief most would miss it, the guard's hand paused, as if something about the man beneath it didn't quite match the situation they thought they understood. The guard's fingers rested against the sleeve of Walter Quinn's jacket for a fraction longer than necessary, as if waiting for resistance that never came, and that absence of reaction created a subtle tension that spread outward like a ripple across still water. Around them, the pier carried on with its routine rhythm, forklifts humming in the distance, a crane pivoting slowly against the pale sky, but closer in, conversations had thinned into quiet observation. Lieutenant Pike noticed it immediately, the shift in attention, the way a few enlisted sailors had stopped mid-task, their eyes lingering a second too long on a situation that should have been simple. He did not like that. Situations on his pier were supposed to be clear, controlled, resolved without hesitation. "Go ahead," he said, sharper this time, gesturing with two fingers. "Move him." The second guard stepped in, more confident now, placing a hand on Walter's other arm. Together they began to guide him back toward the yellow line, toward the exit road that curved away from the water. Walter moved with them, not resisting, not helping either, his steps measured and steady, boots making a soft, worn sound against the concrete. His gaze did not drop. It remained level, scanning the ships again, as if committing something to memory, or perhaps confirming something only he understood. Pike watched closely, arms folding across his chest, the posture of command settling in deeper as he convinced himself the matter was already finished. You cannot just walk onto a naval pier and expect access, he continued, voice carrying just enough for those nearby to hear. There are protocols. There are clearances. That is how this works. Walter did not answer. The silence stretched, not empty, but full, like a held breath that refused to release. One of the younger sailors near a stack of cargo crates shifted his weight, glancing between Pike and the old man, something uncertain flickering across his face before he quickly looked away. The guard on Walter's right adjusted his grip slightly, his thumb brushing near the edge of the jacket where the fabric parted just enough to reveal the small metal tag again, dull and unpolished, catching a brief glint of sunlight. It was not shaped like any standard identification badge. No barcode, no embedded chip, no visible markings that meant anything in the present system. The guard frowned for a second, a small crease forming between his brows, but he said nothing. Regulations were clear. Unidentified meant unauthorized. Still, something about it lingered in his mind, an impression he could not immediately place. Pike stepped forward, closing the distance by a few feet, his voice lowering but tightening. Last chance, he said. If you have business here, you present it. Otherwise, you leave. Walter finally stopped walking. The guards halted with him, their hands still in place, unsure whether to push forward or release. The wind shifted again, stronger this time, carrying the sharp scent of salt and fuel across the pier. Walter's fingers lightly touched the edge of the tag beneath his jacket, not clutching it, just resting there, as if acknowledging its presence. When he spoke, his voice did not rise. It did not need to. I was told to come, he said, each word measured, unhurried. He paused, eyes drifting briefly past Pike once more, toward the command building at the far end of the pier. By someone who still remembers. The words settled into the space between them, quiet but heavy, and for reasons Pike could not explain, they did not sound like a request. They sounded like a fact that had already been decided somewhere else. Lieutenant Pike held Walter Quinn's gaze for a moment longer than he intended, something in the old man's words refusing to settle neatly into the categories he understood, and that irritation sharpened into something colder, more deliberate. He took a slow step forward, closing the space until he stood just a few feet away, boots stopping right at the edge of a faint oil stain baked into the concrete. That is not how access works here, he said, voice low but carrying, every syllable controlled. You do not get invited by someone who remembers. You get cleared through command, through systems, through documentation. He gestured toward the guard. And right now, you have none of that. The crowd nearby had grown without anyone acknowledging it, a quiet semicircle of uniforms and watchful eyes, each person sensing that something about the exchange did not align with the simplicity Pike was trying to enforce. Walter did not move. The wind tugged again at his jacket, revealing the metal tag more clearly this time, hanging against his chest on a thin, worn cord. It was not polished. It was not official by any modern standard. It looked like something made in a place where official things did not exist. Pike's eyes dropped to it, narrowing slightly. What is that supposed to be? He asked, reaching out without waiting for permission. His finger tapped lightly against the metal, producing a dull, flat sound that seemed to disappear into the open air. You think this passes for identification? There was a faint shift in the atmosphere, subtle but real, like the moment before a storm changes direction. One of the guards glanced at Pike, then back at Walter, his grip loosening just enough to signal uncertainty. Walter's hand moved, not quickly, not aggressively, simply placing itself between Pike's finger and the tag, gently pushing the contact away. The motion was calm, but final. Do not touch that, he said, his voice still even, but now carrying a weight that had not been there before, something older than the situation itself. Pike straightened, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face, quickly replaced by the rigid composure of rank. You do not give orders here, he replied, louder now, aware again of the audience. You are out of line, and you are out of clearance. He turned slightly, addressing the guards. Remove him. This time there was no hesitation in his tone, and the expectation of compliance hung heavy in the air. The guards adjusted their stance, preparing to guide Walter forward again, but the moment stretched, just long enough for doubt to seep in. Off to the side, near a stack of secured equipment cases, Seaman Eli Turner had been watching from the beginning, his task forgotten in his hands. He was young, new enough to still believe that rank explained everything, but not so new that he had not learned to recognize when something felt wrong. It was not what Walter said. It was what he did not say. It was the way he stood, the way he absorbed every word without reacting, like someone who had already measured the situation and found it lacking. Turner's eyes drifted to the metal tag, then back to the old man's face, a quiet unease settling in his chest. He had seen confident officers. He had seen seasoned chiefs. This was something else entirely. Pike's voice cut back in, sharper, pressing the moment forward. Now. The command echoed across the pier, clean and decisive, but beneath it, something had shifted, something none of them could yet name, and as the guards prepared to move again, Turner reached slowly for his radio, not drawing attention, not breaking protocol outright, but feeling, with growing certainty, that this was no longer just a routine removal. The command hung in the air, firm and final, and this time the guards moved with clearer intent, their hands tightening just enough to guide Walter Quinn forward, but again, something in the motion slowed before it fully committed, like a machine encountering resistance it could not detect. Walter took one step, then stopped on his own, not resisting, simply choosing not to continue, and that small act, that quiet refusal without force, shifted the balance in a way no one could immediately explain. Lieutenant Pike's patience thinned further, the controlled edges of his authority beginning to show strain. "You are making this unnecessarily difficult," he said, voice clipped, projecting certainty as much for himself as for those watching. "This is not a negotiation." Walter did not look at him right away. His attention drifted once more toward the harbor, toward a specific vessel this time, a gray hull anchored farther out, its silhouette cutting clean against the horizon. His eyes lingered there for a second longer than before, as if confirming something, then returned slowly. "No," Walter said quietly, "it is not." The simplicity of the reply, the absence of argument, only deepened the tension. Pike exhaled sharply, turning his head toward the growing crowd, aware now that the situation had drawn more attention than it deserved. A senior petty officer stood near the edge of the group, arms folded, watching with a neutral expression that revealed nothing but suggested everything. Pike straightened, adjusting his posture, reasserting control through presence. "You are trespassing on a secured military installation," he stated, each word deliberate, official. "Failure to comply with removal will result in further action." The phrase was standard, procedural, something he had said before in less complicated moments, but here it sounded heavier, less certain, as if the words themselves were being weighed by the space around them. Walter's hand remained near the small metal tag, thumb resting lightly against its edge, not gripping it, just acknowledging it, as if it were a point of reference rather than proof. "I was not invited through your system," he said, voice steady, eyes now fixed directly on Pike. "That does not mean I was not invited." The distinction landed differently, subtle but precise, and for a brief moment Pike hesitated, just enough for doubt to flicker before he suppressed it. "That means nothing here," he replied quickly, stepping forward again, closing the gap to re-establish dominance. "What matters is authorization. What matters is command." Walter held his gaze without challenge, without submission, simply present in a way that made the surrounding noise of the pier feel distant. "Then you should check with command," he said. The suggestion was calm, almost courteous, but it carried a quiet certainty that unsettled more than it reassured. Off to the side, Seaman Eli Turner had already lifted his radio slightly, keeping it low near his chest, his thumb hovering over the transmit button. He glanced once toward Pike, then back to Walter, the unease in his chest now forming into a decision. He did not announce it. He did not ask permission. He simply turned a few degrees away from the group, shielding the motion with his body, and pressed the button. His voice, when it came, was low and controlled, careful not to carry beyond the small circle of sound between him and the device. "Base command, this is Seaman Turner on Pier 7, he said, choosing his words with unusual precision. "Requesting verification on a possible visitor. Name not confirmed yet. Situation, does not match standard protocol." The response did not come immediately, only a soft static hum in his ear, but even that felt like a shift, like a line had been drawn that ran beyond the pier, beyond Pike's authority, into something larger. Back at the center of the standoff, Pike gave a final nod to the guards, unaware of the call being made just yards away. "Move him," he said again, more force behind it now, pushing the moment forward, but beneath the command, beneath the certainty he projected, something had already begun to move in the opposite direction, unseen, unannounced, and impossible to stop. The guards moved again, this time committing fully, their hands guiding Walter Quinn forward with a firmer pressure that signaled the end of patience, but even as his boots shifted across the concrete, there was no sense of compliance in the movement, only a quiet allowance, as if he were letting the moment play out rather than participating in it. The wind carried a sharper gust across the pier, rattling loose cables against a nearby mast, the metallic clatter echoing briefly before fading into the low hum of engines out on the water. Lieutenant Pike watched closely, arms still folded, his posture rigid, convinced that control had been re-established, that the situation was returning to something predictable. "That is how this works," he said again, almost to himself, reinforcing the order he believed in. "Procedure. Chain of command. Clear lines." Walter's steps slowed once more, not stopping this time, but easing just enough to draw attention to the rhythm, steady and unhurried, out of sync with the urgency Pike was trying to impose. His hand remained near the small metal tag, fingers brushing its edge in a motion so subtle it might have gone unnoticed if not for the way the light caught it again, a faint glint that seemed older than the rest of the scene. One of the guards glanced down at it again, curiosity pressing against training, but he kept moving, following the instruction he had been given. Off to the side, Seaman Eli Turner held his position, radio still close, listening as the soft static shifted into a voice on the other end, calm but alert. "Pier 7, say again," the voice responded. Turner swallowed, choosing his words carefully, aware now that what he said next would matter more than he fully understood. "Unidentified individual on restricted access point," he said quietly. "Claims invitation. No visible credentials. Situation, feels off." There was a pause on the line, longer this time, not empty but active, as if something was being checked, cross-referenced, elevated. Turner's grip tightened slightly on the radio, his eyes flicking back to Walter, who was now just a few feet from the boundary line, the edge between allowed and removed. "Stand by," the voice finally said, tone shifting just enough to signal that the information had landed somewhere beyond routine. Back at the center, Pike stepped forward again, closing the final distance, intent on ending the scene before it stretched any further. "That is far enough," he called out, raising a hand toward the guards. "Once he crosses that line, he is off this pier." The words were clear, definitive, a line drawn both physically and procedurally. Walter paused at the edge, one boot hovering just before the painted stripe, the yellow worn from years of foot traffic and sun. For a brief moment, everything seemed to narrow to that single point, the line, the step, the decision. Walter looked down at it, then back up, his gaze moving past Pike again, toward the command building in the distance, then beyond that, toward the anchored ships. "It was not supposed to be here," he said quietly, almost to himself, though the words carried just enough for those closest to hear. Pike frowned, irritation returning. "What was not supposed to be here?" he demanded, stepping closer, seeking clarity, or perhaps control. Walter did not answer directly. Instead, his hand pressed lightly against the metal tag once more, and for the first time, there was the faintest shift in his expression, not emotion, not quite, but recognition, as if something long settled had just moved. "The weight," he said. The word lingered, undefined, and in that same moment, Turner's radio crackled again, louder this time, the voice on the other end no longer neutral. "Pier 7, confirm the individual has not left your location, it said, urgency threading through the calm. Turner's eyes widened slightly, his gaze snapping back to Walter, then to Pike, the pieces no longer fitting into the simple pattern they had started with. He is still here, Turner replied, voice steady despite the shift he felt building. A brief silence followed, then a response that carried weight beyond its volume. Do not move him. Repeat, do not move him. The words did not reach Pike yet, but the change had already begun, quiet and irreversible, moving toward them faster than any of them realized. The words from the radio had not yet reached Lieutenant Pike, but they had already changed everything, bending the moment in a direction no one on the pier could see, not yet, not fully. Seaman Eli Turner lowered the device slightly, his heartbeat steady but heavier now, the instruction repeating in his mind with a clarity that cut through uncertainty. Do not move him. The guards, unaware of the shift, held Walter Quinn at the edge of the painted line, their hands still in place, waiting for the final confirmation that would send him off the pier. Walter stood exactly where he had stopped, one step from leaving, one step from staying, his posture unchanged, his expression calm, as if the outcome had already been decided somewhere beyond this small strip of concrete. The harbor stretched behind him, gray water rolling in slow, deliberate swells, the distant ships steady against the horizon, their presence constant, unmoved by the tension unfolding on land. Lieutenant Pike took another step forward, closing the space once more, his patience now worn thin by what he saw as unnecessary delay. Why are we waiting? He demanded, looking from one guard to the other. I gave a clear order. The guard on Walter's left hesitated, just briefly, his grip loosening by a fraction. Sir, we were just, he began, but Pike cut him off with a sharp gesture. There is nothing to consider. He does not belong here. The certainty in his voice was firm, practiced, but beneath it, there was a faint edge, something unsettled that he did not acknowledge. Walter's gaze shifted again, not toward Pike this time, but toward the command building at the far end of the pier, its glass reflecting the pale sky. He watched it with quiet focus, as if tracking something that had not yet appeared. His hand remained near the metal tag, thumb resting lightly against it, the small piece of worn metal now carrying a presence far greater than its size suggested. The wind softened for a moment, the air settling into a brief stillness that seemed to press in around them, muting the distant sounds of machinery and movement. You are about to make a mistake, Walter said, not as a warning, not as a threat, but as a simple statement, delivered without urgency. Pike's jaw tightened immediately, the words landing harder than they should have. No, he replied, voice colder now, stepping even closer, reducing the space between them to almost nothing. The mistake was you walking onto this pier without authorization. He turned slightly, raising his voice just enough to reassert control over the growing audience. Escort him out. Now. The command came down clean, final, leaving no room for interpretation. The guards shifted their stance again, preparing to complete the action, their hands firm once more on Walter's arms. Off to the side, Turner lifted the radio back to his mouth, this time not hiding the motion, urgency overriding caution. Sir, he called out, voice cutting through the moment, directed toward Pike but carrying further than he intended. We just received. Pike turned sharply, irritation flaring. Stand down, seaman, he snapped, not giving him space to finish. Handle your station. Turner froze for half a second, the weight of rank pressing down, but the voice from the radio echoed again in his ear, louder now, insistent. Do not move him. He swallowed, then spoke anyway, pushing the words out before hesitation could stop him. Sir, command says do not move him. The statement landed in the open air, clear and undeniable, and for the first time, the rhythm of the scene broke completely. Pike stared at him, the authority in his posture colliding with information he had not anticipated. Repeat that, he said, slower now, the edge in his voice sharpening into something else. Turner held his ground, the radio still in his hand, the connection to something larger than the pier itself. They said do not move him, sir. The guards did not release Walter, but their grip no longer tightened. It held, uncertain, suspended between two opposing commands. And in that suspended moment, as the wind returned and the distant ships remained unmoved, the realization began to take shape, quiet and unavoidable, that whatever was coming next was no longer under Lieutenant Pike's control. The air seemed to tighten around Lieutenant Pike as the words settled in, not loud, not dramatic, but precise enough to fracture the certainty he had been holding on to. He did not move right away. For a brief second, his posture remained exactly as it had been, shoulders squared, chin slightly raised, authority intact on the surface, but something behind his eyes shifted, recalculating. "Who gave that order?" he asked, his voice lower now, controlled in a different way, less performative, more cautious. Seaman Turner glanced down at the radio, then back up, the weight of the moment pressing into his chest. "Base command related, sir," he said. "It came through priority channel." That detail mattered. It changed the shape of the situation in a way Pike could not ignore, even if he wanted to. Around them, the small crowd had gone completely still, conversations gone silent, every movement reduced to observation. Even the guards holding Walter Quinn seemed to sense the shift, their hands no longer guiding, only resting, as if unsure whether they were still supposed to act at all. Pike's gaze flicked to Walter, studying him more carefully now, as if seeing him for the first time without the filter of assumption. The worn jacket. The steady eyes. The way he had not once raised his voice. The way he had not once tried to justify his presence. It did not fit the pattern Pike knew. It did not fit any pattern he had been trained to handle. "Command does not override protocol without reason," Pike said slowly, more to himself than to anyone else, but loud enough to be heard. "There has to be a record. A file. Something." Walter said nothing. He simply stood there, exactly where he had been stopped, one step from leaving, one step from staying, as if that line no longer held any meaning at all. The metal tag at his chest shifted slightly in the breeze, catching the light again, dull but persistent, like a signal that refused to fade. Turner's radio crackled once more, sharper this time, the voice on the other end no longer distant. "Pier 7, confirm visual," it said. "Is the individual still on location?" Turner responded immediately, his voice steady despite the tension building around him. "Yes, sir. He is still here." A brief pause followed, then a second voice came through, deeper, more authoritative, layered over the first. "Maintain position. No further action until arrival." Arrival. The word landed differently. It carried direction. Movement. Something was already on its way. Pike heard it this time, clear enough that there was no room to dismiss it. His jaw tightened again, but not in frustration. This was something else. Something closer to realization. He looked past Turner, toward the command building at the far end of the pier, then beyond it, scanning the access road that led down from the higher level of the base. The guards slowly released their grip, not fully stepping back, but no longer holding Walter in place. The tension in their hands eased into uncertainty, into waiting. Walter did not move. He did not step forward or back. He simply remained, as if he had been waiting for this exact moment all along. The wind shifted again, carrying a low, distant sound from up the access road, not loud, not dramatic, just the steady approach of something official, something deliberate. A vehicle, maybe more than one. Pike's eyes narrowed slightly as he focused, the pieces beginning to align whether he wanted them to or not. Behind him, one of the sailors straightened instinctively, then another, small adjustments rippling through the group as if some unspoken signal had passed between them. The atmosphere changed, not visibly, but undeniably. Less like a confrontation. More like a pause before recognition. Pike lowered his hands slowly, no longer issuing commands, no longer certain that they would matter. And for the first time since the moment began, he did not speak. He waited. The sound grew clearer as it came down the access road, not fast, not aggressive, but deliberate, controlled, the kind of movement that did not need urgency to command attention. Heads turned in unison, not because anyone ordered it, but because something in the air had already shifted to make space for what was arriving. A dark staff vehicle rolled into view first, its polished surface reflecting the pale sky, followed by another behind it, both moving with a quiet authority that needed no sirens, no signals. The vehicles slowed as they approached the edge of the pier, tires crunching softly over the transition from asphalt to concrete, and then they stopped. No one spoke. No one moved. The doors opened with a measured precision, and from the lead vehicle stepped a man whose presence seemed to settle over the entire scene before he even took a full step forward. Admiral Jonathan Mercer did not look around to assess the situation. He did not ask for a report. His gaze moved immediately, directly, locking on to Walter Quinn as if there had never been any question of where he would be. The distance between them was still a good 40 yards, but it did not feel like distance. It felt like a line already connected. The sailors nearest the vehicle straightened instinctively, backs tightening, shoulders aligning, the reflex of recognition moving faster than thought. Lieutenant Pike felt it as well, the subtle but undeniable shift in gravity that comes when someone of unquestionable authority enters a space. He turned, fully now, eyes fixing on the Admiral, the reality of the situation landing with a clarity that pushed aside everything he had assumed just minutes before. Mercer began to walk, not quickly, not slowly, but with a steady, unbroken pace that carried across the pier like a metronome resetting the rhythm of everything around it. Each step was deliberate, each movement controlled, his uniform immaculate, his presence quiet but absolute. He did not acknowledge Pike. He did not acknowledge the guards. He did not acknowledge the small crowd that had formed. His focus remained on Walter, and only Walter. The wind shifted again, carrying the faint sound of fabric moving, the soft creak of leather, the distant hum of the harbor now reduced to background noise. As the Admiral closed the distance, the effect spread outward. Conversations had already stopped, but now even the smallest movement stilled. A wrench lowered slowly onto a crate. A clipboard held mid-air without turning a page. The guards who had held Walter stepped back fully now, not instructed, not corrected, simply responding to something deeper than protocol. Pike stood rigid, his mind moving through possibilities, through explanations, through the rapid reordering of everything he had believed about the man in front of him. Mercer reached the last few yards, the space narrowing until there was nothing left between them but a single step. He stopped there, facing Walter Quinn directly, close enough now that the details were unmistakable, the worn jacket, the quiet eyes, the small metal tag resting against his chest. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was not empty. It was full, dense, carrying weight that pressed into everyone watching. Then, without hesitation, without announcement, Admiral Mercer straightened just slightly, his posture aligning with a precision that had been practiced for decades, and he raised his hand in a clean, unmistakable salute. It was not casual. It was not symbolic. It was exact. Every angle correct. Every motion deliberate. The kind of salute reserved for something that mattered. The kind of salute that did not need explanation. And in that instant, the entire pier seemed to freeze, not because anyone ordered it, but because no one could move past what they had just seen. The salute did not waver. Admiral Mercer held it with the kind of precision that erased any doubt about its intent, his eyes fixed on Walter Quinn with a recognition that ran deeper than rank, deeper than protocol. For a brief second, the entire pier remained suspended in that moment, every sound pulled back, every motion paused, as if the world itself had chosen to stand at attention. Then Walter moved. It was not sudden. It was not dramatic. He simply straightened a fraction, the years still present in his posture but no longer defining it, and he returned the salute with the same quiet accuracy, his hand rising in a motion that carried memory rather than effort. It was not the speed of the movement that mattered. It was the certainty. The familiarity. The fact that it had been done countless times before, in places far from this pier, under conditions no one here had witnessed. The two salutes met in the air between them, held for a moment that felt longer than it was, then lowered in unison, clean and complete. No one spoke. No one needed to. Admiral Mercer took a single step closer, his voice, when it came, low and steady, carried without force. "You took your time," he said. It was not an accusation. It was not a complaint. It was something closer to acknowledgement, to a conversation that had started long before anyone else here had been present. Walter's expression did not change, but there was the faintest shift in his eyes, something almost like recognition settling into place. "So did you," he replied. The exchange was simple, almost ordinary in its phrasing, but it carried a weight that pressed outward, reshaping the understanding of everyone within earshot. Lieutenant Pike stood motionless, the certainty he had relied on now completely replaced by something else, something quieter and far less comfortable. His mind moved quickly, retracing every word he had said, every order he had given, each one now landing differently in the context of what stood before him. The guards had already stepped back fully, their posture no longer defensive, no longer directive, simply still. Seaman Turner lowered his radio slowly, the device no longer needed, the chain of command now physically present in front of them. Admiral Mercer turned his head slightly, just enough to acknowledge the space around him, his gaze passing over Pike for the first time. It was not a harsh look. It was not even a long one. But it was enough. Pike straightened instinctively, the reflex automatic, his voice catching for a fraction of a second before he forced it steady. "Sir," he said, the word carrying a different weight now, stripped of assumption, grounded in recognition. Mercer did not respond immediately. Instead, he reached out, not toward Pike, not toward the guards, but toward Walter, his hand briefly resting against the older man's shoulder in a gesture that was both restrained and unmistakably personal. "You are right where you are supposed to be," he said quietly. The word settled into the space with finality, closing the gap between uncertainty and truth. Walter gave a small nod, nothing more, his hand dropping from the metal tag at his chest, no longer needing to hold onto it as a point of reference. Around them, the pier slowly exhaled, movement returning in careful increments, but nothing quite the same as it had been before. Pike remained where he stood, the line he had drawn earlier now meaningless, erased not by argument, but by reality. He did not speak again. He did not need to. Because in that silence, in that single salute returned and recognized, the lesson had already been delivered, clear and permanent, without a single raised voice, without a single demand, only the quiet, undeniable weight of truth standing in front of him.